Yeah, we're getting some good snow this morning. It's coming down pretty thick. It has been for most of the night. Probably near 9-10 inches at this point. That's a Sidney Bechet playing in the background. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Sidney Bechet, one of the most charismatic and enigmatic figures in jazz. A fantastic player, a dynamic personality that was somewhat explosive and prone to outbursts and violence, but yet a virtuoso of the highest level, going back to the days of Armstrong and Joey Will Morton. Sidney Bechet is certainly one of the founders of the jazz canon and jazz as we know it. So this is what we're listening to here. Some Blue Note, Sidney Bechet. And this is from an earlier era of Blue Note when they were far more into leasing already recorded stuff, particularly from Europe, and issuing it in America. And Bechet was a fairly good star at one point in America, but he became, somewhat off the radar by the 30s and 40s, being in Europe so long. I believe he served a little prison time in France for shooting a man. And if memory serves, he shot the fellow for not playing the right note, and an argument ensued, and a shootout happened. What Marsalis talks about it in the jazz documentary, Bechet is just a character. I think he was quite the imbiber and liked his juice. But, his fire, his vitriol, his passionate stance on life, his flirtatious, kind of ass-grabbing mentality, it's kind of electrifying in a way. It just kind of grabs your attention. He does quite a lot of stuff at this point in France that got issued on Blue Note during the 10-inch era. And then a lot of the stuff ends up getting issued again on LP. And this is a separate 10-inch sequence from the 5000 sequence. They give the Dixieland stuff, George Lewis, and stuff like Bechet, Art Hodes. They got their own sequence. There's probably 25, 30 titles in that one. Some cool covers, and these, like this says Jazz Festival Concert. It's Paris 1952. Pink and blue covers. I'm a big Bechet guy. He's just a lot of fun. It's traditional New Orleans stuff. But like on my Facebook post I did this morning, I like his spunk. And I know I mean his personality, his vivacious kind of confrontational approach to life and to playing. But there's certainly a sexual flirtatious spunk to him as well that's somewhat just enjoyable and risque, and probably in today's world we wouldn't appreciate all the ass pinching that this guy was probably capable of. And he has issues with the bottle, and he probably wouldn't be a very woke, politically correct motherfucker today, but I still love him. I think he's honest. I think he's refreshing. I find honest people refreshing. I find phony, fake posturing embarrassingly ridiculous. And anybody who postures that they don't like sex, or that they don't like the beauty of a woman's body, and that's taboo, you're lying. We all think it's amazing. We all love sexuality. We all love contact. We all love flirtation. We all like to be seen as attractive. And for someone to act like, oh, sex, it's just reeks of you're trying to sound right. But who really doesn't like those things, aside from maybe the people who can't get those things? That's just my 2 cents. I mean, I've spent my whole life trying to avoid phony and fake. I don't find anybody saying that beautiful woman offends me as being genuine. I mean, I'm not condoning someone saying, come in my office here and let's see if I can get you a raise. You know, that's obviously inappropriate. But I think we've certainly swung the pendulum too far back in the other way for my taste, for how I feel about my place in the world. We shouldn't be so offended and delicate and sensitive about something that's a quite natural and necessary part of our lives. To create that taboo, to create that shame and that embarrassment, and it's just to me it causes so much more damage to people. You know what I mean? Sexual repression, I think, in any form is an awful, awful thing, and has done so much damage to every society that's engaged in it. But yeah, Sidney Bechet, don't think he would have been anything different today. I think he'd have been the same guy. I mean, to have a shootout with someone over a note played wrong. And I don't know, I'm not sure of this, but I think even when Marsalis might have suggested that Marsalis actually was wrong. It's just that Bechet had always played it that way because he liked it that way. But I can't remember for sure. Just a fun character, though. And Sidney Bechet Blue Note stuff is worth grabbing, and you can get it as an original Blue Note for a fraction of the cost of most Blue Note 10 inches or most Blue Note old 1500 series LPs. So check him out, dig into him. He's a fun character, and let's move on to part 2. Another gal I'm a big fan of is Dusty Springfield, the British songstress of the 60s, probably into the 70s. Her most famous track here in America is probably almost certainly Son of a Preacher Man, which I think she recorded in Memphis with a soul, the black backing band. And that whole record's a really wonderful R&B with a British gal singing. A lot of her British UK stuff, a lot of it's on the Philips label. And there's some stuff that's better than others. Some of the production on this record is actually quite reverb heavy and echoey, which I'm not a real fan of. 2 songs kind of jumped out at me on this, though. Don't Say It, Baby, which is nice. But it's the next song, Guess Who, that I think this is really fun. And that leads me to my next statement here. Boy, oh boy, is there a current British singer who sure has a lot of dusty inner sound. And that's, of course, the great Adele. You know, this is her latest record. And I'm not a fan of all of it. There's a couple good songs. But when Dusty Springfield kind of belts and closes the eyes and gets into it, it sure sounds a lot like Adele when she's got her eyes closed and she starts to belt. I think there's a little bit more separation when they're singing softly. But even here, this sounds like it could be an Adele song in a lot of ways. That sounds like Adele so much. And it's not that surprising. British stars separated by a few decades singing from a similar songbook. Production values for Adele have always been kind of a throwback retro thing. And I think on some level, oh, it sounds like Adele so much. I think some of it might be just my interpretation of a British accent. Nice. So, I'm a big Adele fan. I like some of her stuff a lot. I think she's a little overrated at times. I mean, it's all fairly done before stuff. I love the sparseness of this. It's nice. And I have probably 5 or 6 Dusty Springfield records. I don't get too carried away with her. But she's an important piece of the history, just in terms of Son of a Preacher Man alone. The other big hit she had was, oh my God, I can't think of it right now. Hold on. You Don't Have to Say You Love Me. It's another fine song. I have both of those at 45s, and they often go to gigs with me. And she has other songs that I like and enjoy, but she's certainly not a giant in terms of a body of work that's got just immense, endless, great stuff and influential recordings. I don't think anybody ever saw Dusty that way, but I mean, she's fun, she's accessible, she's got some elements of jazz and R&B at times, like ADELE. I just think it's interesting how much they sound alike to me, especially when they get into those more guttural, pushing her voice out more. I just kept hearing ADELE throughout this whole record. This is one I just got recently, honestly. And there's some of Dusty's records I've had for years, but this is one that came in with a other sale. It was part of a group of records I bought. And I put it on today. I'm like, I wasn't super impressed, and a couple songs kind of jumped out at me, which is kind of how that process works for me. I'm just looking for songs I think that are fun to play when I have people in the cafe, when I'm DJing little sets and stuff. So I'm both kind of just listening for what's that catchy one? What's that melancholic one? There's just certain temperatures and vibes and colors I'm trying to capture because I like to live in that headspace. And I think a lot of people appreciate kind of chilling out in that headspace. Another record I want to touch on real quick is a Hank Mobley session on Blue Note, 1540. It's probably not as acclaimed as some of Hank Mobley's sessions. Anything Mobley is fairly collectible and can go for pretty good bucks, especially on the Blue Note label. But even his Prestige and the Savoy stuff, it's, you know, I mean, it's for fairly expensive stuff, hundreds of dollars, into the thousands for sure. Time that gum was done. But this record I had played in a while. And what I enjoy about it is it's got Lee Morgan and Donald Byrd. And in some ways, that's the front line that defines the Blue Note hard bop sound. In a lot of ways, these three kids were the leading cutting edge of what Blue Note was doing in 56, 55, 57, into 58. Byrd still wasn't signed to the label as a leader. Lee Morgan was and has 6 great titles in the mid to late 50s. Mobley has a fairly good string of records as well. He doesn't really leave. Morgan does leave for a while and goes to VJ. Makes some nice titles for VJ out of Chicago. But then he comes back to Blue Note, Sidewinder and all that, and has another run of records at Blue Note. And of course, Byrd gets signed to Blue Note probably in 59. But he shows up fairly extensively as a sideman here in this era of Blue Note. But what's interesting about this record, probably recorded in 55, maybe 56. Having not heard it in a while, it was pretty clear to me the difference between Mobley and Byrd. Morgan and Byrd. Both trumpet players, of course. But years ago, as a Blue Note virgin, beginner, as I was collecting these records, when you have a record with 2 trumpet players, it was hard for me to know who was what, where, when, or why. But now to me, Byrd and Morgan have fairly different sounds. Morgan's fairly aggressive and bright and tactile. I mean, just has a lot of edge and intensity, volumes of aggressive agitation. Morgan seems very kind of focused, hints of fury, and I mean, it's controlled, and it's not just a raw emotional anger or angst. It's just he plays with a real tenacity and a real clarity of purpose, it seems like. And Byrd has a softer edge, and he's not like an Art Farmer or a Miles Davis. He's still a very bright up tempo, on the harder edge of the sound of the trumpet. And again, the trumpet can go from cloudy and milky to crystal clear based on how you play and what your emotional mindset is. Some guys just played that emotional foggy day sound really well. Miles often sounds quite milky and cloudy. That's very frequently his notes kind of mud from one to the next. Like, where does the clouds begin and the dew end? Like, it's so, each note is just kind of mushed at times, and sometimes that's a wonderful sensation. Other times it feels like it lacks clarity, and almost it lacks a sense of purpose, it feels like at times. It feels like there's some insecurity in there at times, just almost an uncertainty of which way he wanted to go. Or, I mean, you feel like Miles doubts himself frequently, especially in certain points in his career. And I'm talking in terms of how he's playing, where he wants to go with it, what he's saying. There's just, it feels like there's two people on his shoulder arguing. And he often chose the road of simplicity and melancholy and minimalism. But I think because there was a lot of thought and pondering in there, but sometimes between notes. And BYRD's certainly nothing like that. BYRD's far more on the upper end of things. You know, more in the range of a Kenny Dorham. You know, he's not the Booker Little, Clifford Brown, Freddie Hubbard, Lee Morgan, just crystal clear, hard driving roller coasters of sound. And BYRD's capable of that. But BYRD feels far more like a singer, like there's lyrics, like he's telling a story. He's got more narration in him. Morgan's just punching out emotional, and BYRD has more of a narration, a starting and a beginning that's telling a story that leads to an ending, and it feels very like almost spoken or sung at times. And there's a lot of gospel in Donald Byrd, a lot of the blues in Donald Byrd. So sometimes slow and twisting, and will meld into some fiery lines. But Byrd seems definitely more, what's the word I'm looking for? The bottom line is he's just very different from Lee Morgan. And so 10, 15 years ago when I was buying all my Blue Notes in the mid-2000s, I mean, young me couldn't hear the difference in these two cats at all. And listening to this the other day, probably yesterday I think it was, there was no doubts in my mind who was playing when and where. I'm like, oh, man, well, let's listen to Morgan. You know, then Hank would come in. And Hank's such a chameleon. I mean, Hank is very much going to mold himself to the sounds that he's playing with. He doesn't seem to lead sessions emotionally very often. He seems to be more of the guy that's going to graft himself to whoever that leader is. And even if he's the leader, he's often prone to allowing a powerful emotional sideman lead, not in terms of art direction or like the song selection or even being the lead soloist, but their character and personality gets so implanted on the music. And Mobley seems to be able to just like, oh yeah, Sonny Clark. There's a great example of a guy. Sonny Clark as a sideman could leave such a strong impression on a record that everybody else in that session seemed to take on some of Sonny Clark's ideologies, spirituality, philosophies. You know, just a strong projector of his will on a session. And I think that some of it was his political and social commentary. I think his dialogue between takes and sessions. I think Clark was a very strong communicator verbally. And so a lot of his ideas get implanted upon his bandmates and session mates, and it transposes into those recordings. And Mobley, I don't think, was a guy sitting there between takes, sharing much philosophy or spirituality or anger or aggression. And he was more like you said, listening to someone narrate that stuff and talk about how what was happening in the news made them feel. And I think Mobley just sat back and go, yeah, you know, I agree with you. You're right, Sonny Clark. Yeah, let's get some anger going here. You know what I mean? That's one of the cool things about jazz. It's like the emotional imprint on a session doesn't necessarily come from the leader of that session. And that can have more impact on the session than the songs selected. You can choose some corny-ass selections, but put some real vibrant anger behind that and end up with a powerful record. And that's not going to happen to Blue Note too often because these guys were allowed to pick their own songs almost 100%. So they weren't going to pick a lot of songs from theater and Broadway just because the American public were going to know it and love it. Not to say they didn't do those songs at times, they sure did, but it was by their choice because they wanted to interpret it in their own way or because they liked the melody. And again, melody is such an important aspect of any song selection or of any part of that process. You could hear something in a musical, walk around for 2 weeks humming it, and not having even liked the musical or liked the song, the melody is what's stuck in your head. And that's a tactile way of it saying, I belong here and you like me. I'm with you. And so all of a sudden you find some pretty heavy cats reinterpreting some kind of corny songs, but making them not corny at all because they're putting their impression on them and just borrowing those chords and those melodies and saying, that was a gorgeous melody. Boy, it would be better if it sounded like this. So one of the things I've had a lot of fun here within the cafe is just trying to teach people how to hear jazz and teach jazz to people in terms of like what it means and what it symbolizes. It's not just, this music of difficult, ego-driven eccentrics. It's not just meant to be music for the intellectuals and the monocle-wearing sophisticates. And even though all those people have inherited that music and kind of branded on themselves and say, oh, we get it because we're so, elite and sophisticated, and so I can hear all this complex free jazz. And good for you. That's fantastic. I'm glad you love that shit and dig it. But, there's so much jazz that's just so much more about emotion, about feeling, about history, and about America, and about the story that is behind all of this. And when you can listen to, again, the mask maker that I talked about in Africa, the witch doctor, the shaman, carving the mask to protect his village, it was never about being the best carver of masks. That ego never was part of his process. He became a great carver out of necessity by always needing to carve more and better masks to be the better protector of his village. Being a protector was his motivation, not being the best carver. By being a great protector, he became a great carver, and his work is now priceless. But the ego of carving was never a part of the process, which is part of what makes his carving so magical, spiritual, and important. So the second ego is driving the vehicle, it minimizes the impact and the influence and the importance of that music as art in my mind, in my ears, in my soul, in my heart. When it's the soul speaking, driving that player to improvise and emote and express his experience on this world and to relate his extenuating circumstances and to help vent that frustration, those guys didn't become virtuosos because they wanted to be like, I'm the best saxophone player in the world. It was because I played this horn so much because it was a place of safety, a place of shelter, a place of comfort, a necessity. I had to be there. And not only did it protect me, not only did it shelter me, it made the people I played for feel something as well. So I'm protecting my village, I'm protecting my friends, the people in this concert hall, in this theater, in this basement jazz club. And remember, in those days, there was no arena concerts. You weren't playing in front of 25,000. You were lucky to have a place where you sat 500. And you could get some of the bigger white cats like Benny Goodman, in the 30s and 40s, into some pretty decent-sized theaters. But for the most part, especially the black musicians, they were likely to be playing in a church basement, and some of the small black clubs might have sat 50 people. And so it's a very immediate connection with that audience. And you feel person to person some of their angst and their pain and their exhaustion, and you just want to protect them. You just want to wrap them up in those notes and give them some joy, some reason to celebrate, maybe a reason to go home and get some sugar roll. That's the magic of it. That's the power of it. That's what makes me feel something. And that's one of the things I'm having the most enjoyable part of this cafe is trying to express and share that with people. It's not about the virtuosity and the complication and the notes. It's not about it being so difficult that you can't listen to it. Some of the most powerful jazz in the world is a simple Ben Webster ballad. Boy, isn't that beautiful? What do you think his soul is saying? This is the stuff I might ask a customer. Listen to that guy pouring that beautiful melancholic tone into that horn. What is his soul saying? What is he telling us? It certainly isn't, boy, listen how good a player I am. I don't think very few of them ever thought that way. I don't think Parker, going through the changes of bebop and encoding this new way of developing sound and melody and rhythm and pulse, it was never about his ego saying, I'm going to be the most imaginative player and change the course of jazz. I think when you are mentally focused on that, you've already lost most of the magic. And when ego and oftentimes composition, not always, becomes the focus, and you want people to think about how talented you are, it just impacts so greatly what I am hearing and what I'm feeling. And it's probably the one thing more than anything else. I don't need to see an album cover. I don't need to see an artist. I can just sit back and listen to something, and fairly quickly my heart, my soul connects with it, or says, this is more intellectual. This is more ego-driven. This is more about self and I than it is about community and sharing that badge, that shield of protection. And I think it's an important way to hear this music in the context of its history. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, was meant to shelter the people that wandered through the wilderness looking for the land of milk and honey. These words will get us through till we find that promised land. And only people who live in struggle and turmoil and chaos and tyranny even think about, I need a promised land. To come up with that ideology speaks of great pain. And it's the same principle here in jazz music. Boy, I want to protect my friends, my family, my loved ones, my community. I want them to come out tonight and feel warmth and shelter and love, joy, celebration, romance. I want us to forget about the danger that lies outside every door. Boy, that danger gets exhausting. Just like that witch doctor in the jungle, there's tigers, there's lions, elephants and rhinos and hippos, other tribesmen, poison darts, starvation. There's a lot of things that can happen. That Congo River might flood and wash you away in your sleep. But boy, I want to protect you tonight from all that. Let's dance and paint our faces and run around this fire with some masks on and celebrate the gods that have allowed us to get this far. It's a powerful message. And in jazz, that's its meaning, that's its purpose, that's its place. And guys like Chet Baker and even Jerry Mulligan, who I love, have a hard time sometimes pushing that envelope beyond virtuosity and playing. And with Baker, it's so often driven by, I need to get high later today. I just feel the drugs in Baker so often talking and speaking through him and being his engine, his motivator. Mulligan was very much a complex arranger, and he loved a lot of what Ellington innovated. Mulligan had a lot of that in him. And Mulligan's actually a fairly deep cat and has a lot of feeling and a lot of guts to his playing. I just don't think it comes from that same place of protection, because a guy like Jerry Mulligan probably didn't live next to the fire of that great volcano every day. And that's not to say all of us don't see a volcano sometimes, and we might even stand on its rim and look down on that caldera and say, woo, that's some hot shit down there, boy. I'm going to get back on that tour bus. And so that might get into his songs and music at times. But there's also, boy, a nice surf today. Sun's gorgeous here in the West Coast. A convertible seems to be running pretty well. I'm going to have myself a cocktail with an umbrella in it, which is all fine and dandy. And it's funny how much the Mulligan West Coast cool, but even a lot of that kind of postmodern, where it starts to become very much about composition. Burst of the Cool is a great example. A lot of that choral sound, those chords they were making, a lot of that slight dissonance and really arranged, composed stuff starts to lean more European in its sound. It's less black gospel. It's less repetitious groove. It's less the blues and more about choral, pastoral changes and sweeping suites, and that European classical feel comes through in a lot of that era of jazz by White Cats. Nothing wrong with it. I love a lot of it. It just speaks from a different place and feels different when you listen to it. And there's a lot of that stuff that has, you start adding those tubas and those French horns, and a lot of it starts becoming much more modern jazz quartet. Much more borrowed from the European way of writing and composing and having key changes and interesting chords and different movements versus the simple beatdown of a Count Basie jumping at the woodside. I'm not going to get complex with you. 1, 2, 3, ba-dum-ba, ba-dum-ba. And then the horns are just expressing feeling. They're just rolling that thunder. But there's no need for us to change that riff. We're swinging. There's plenty of blues left in this riff. I'm going to play this riff for 7 minutes. Y'all take your turn speaking your piece. It's so simple. It's so basic. It's so spaced. It's so full of room to breathe. And it allows their soloists to have that freedom of a wide open highway. This is a simple riff. Based off 3 chords, let me go. Woo! I got all kinds of things to say today, boy. And boy, what that trumpet player said before me, I got some response for that too. Versus composition-driven stuff where, I can't get too off on a tangent here because in 16 measures, I got to go here. We're changing that course. And then 8 more bars after that, we got to go back to a minor. So you're always kind of map questing your route instead of just thinking and feeling. And it's not about right or wrong, good or bad. It's just about what does it make you feel. And the power of the mask carver, the power of that spiritual protection, that blanket that shields me from what's dark in those woods. Even in spite of my lower middle class white Canadian and American upbringing and lifestyle, I still need shelter sometimes. I still need inspiration sometimes. I still need to be wrapped up in that feel of, boy, in spite of all this, we're going to overcome. Watch me get through this. And when they could get through what they did, time to put my boots on and get back to my shuffle. Time to get back to my shuffle. And that's powerful. That's what excites me about it. So anyway, Hank Mobley, Don Bird, Lee Morgan, 3 very divergent personalities. One very kind of mellow, laid-back cat. One very fiery. And I would guess Lee Morgan was fairly opinionated and probably argumentative at times. He just seems very tenacious and full of some tension. And Bird, again, was very much a gospel Detroit brother with a lot of the blues and a lot of that church in him. And you just feel that kind of leaking out of his stained glass persona all the time. And just a wonderful triumvirate, though, of Blue Note influencers. And the wonderful Dusty Springfield, ADELE, certainly must have heard her share of Dusty. And ADELE borrows from other people as well, but their voices have and maybe it's just me hearing a British voice sing, but I have lots of British singers. Shirley Bassey surely doesn't sound nothing like that, you know. And again, Sidney Bechet, talk about a guy that was a great carver of masks, a guy that could really protect himself. He creates this shield of sound around him when he plays that helps him overcome even some of his stupid choices and his drunk decisions. The music's a powerful thing. So that's today's episode. Hope you all enjoy that. It was a little bit off the cuff, but sometimes you got to do that. The snow kind of had me in a certain feeling in a certain way. And again, explaining the joy of jazz and the purpose of jazz and the meaning of jazz and the different camps. I think it's certainly interesting to hear from how I share it. And it's different from how most people have ever heard it explained. And I think it helps a lot of people get into the music on a deeper level. And I do want to say thank you to a few people. A few people reached out and sent me Christmas stuff. And I want to thank those people. I got a cool calendar from a friend of mine. I even taped the calendar up and I taped the note he wrote inside my bookshelf. Thank you, my friend. I also want to thank some of the kind comments I've gotten from a few friends of mine recently. Jack, the Jazz Bums. There's been a few other people as well who've just kind of thanked me for some of my influence, some of my ideation, some of the things I share, and how it's kind of helped shape and share their jazz path and journey. So having that come from some of my contemporaries was very nice. It was very appreciated. You know, it's easy to kind of get discouraged or disillusioned even, because my channel grows, but it doesn't grow like some of these guys do who all of a sudden have 10,000 followers and are getting all these views and stuff. And I don't get too wrapped up in that stuff. I'm too busy to be too wrapped up in that stuff right now, to be honest. But it's still, I mean, it's nice to hear people say, as one of your contemporaries, I really value what you share. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be some top of the line teacher in any way. The music is what teaches me. The records are what teaches me. The history is what teaches me. But it's nice that my interpretation of some of this stuff, others find inspiring, others find informative, others find interesting angles and ways to look at things that they never thought of really before they started watching or listening to what I have to share. And so having that come from a certain number of people that I really appreciate and value, that was really rewarding. So I do appreciate that. And I want you all to stay safe, stay cool, stay warm. If it's snowing where you're at, go out and make a snowman. Go make a snow angel. Go shuffle about in that boot. Go make a mess out there. If you ain't outside, if you ain't snowing, do what you got to do. But I'm going to go throw a snowball at somebody. Y'all have a great day. We'll talk to you soon. We haven't sold a coffee yet. We've been open 2 hours, but that's to be expected. Talk to you soon. Peace.